Welcome to another episode of the Film Florida podcast. My name is John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. We have another great episode for you today. Before I introduce our guest, I wanted to thank you for downloading this episode of the podcast. If you haven't already done so, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. The better our analytics are, the more likely others will be able to find us. Also, as a reminder, we've launched a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit teespring.com/stores/Film Florida to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, and coffee mugs. Today our guest is Boris Malden. Boris is a film and television producer and production manager and has worked in the industry for more than 50 years. He's been part of numerous Emmy, Golden Globe, Academy Award, and PGA nominated and winning projects, as you'll hear on our interview. He's worked on projects for Sony, Fox, NBC, CBS, ABC, Lifetime, USA, Netflix, and many more. For the sake of full disclosure, Boris has been a friend of mine for more than 20 years and has taught me a lot about the industry, and I'm thrilled to talk to him on the podcast. And now our conversation with Boris Malden. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today, Boris.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you get your start in the industry?
That's an interesting story. I never had planned to be in the industry. I was going to school taking what was then computer sciences, but that's when computers were key punch cards. And you'd have a stack of cards 2 inches high just for your name, address, and phone number. My professor was telling everybody how this is the future. This is the wave of the future. And I kind of thought, I'm not going to wear a white coat and punch holes in cards for the rest of my lives. So I didn't quit school, but I didn't go religiously, and I started working nights as a night mechanic at a gas station in Hollywood. And about 3 days a week, about 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, the guy would come in with this goosed up Econoline van filling up, and he was going to location, and it was one of the earliest location vans. It was a company called Cinemobile. Actually, at that time, it was Fuad Saeed Productions. Later, when he sold out to Taft, it became Cinemobile. But Fuad Saeed was the original DP on a show called I Spy with Bill Cosby and that other guy. Anyway, he developed these small location vans that had camera and sound and lights and grip and a generator, a 1,000-amp generator, and hydraulic lift in the back for 25 feet. So this guy would bring this van in, would fuel up, and I got to know him. We chit-chatted. And after about 6 weeks or 7 weeks, I got a call one morning that he had broken his leg and was going to be out for a while, and they'd taken a guy and moved him up, and they needed a PA, just a general PA to go work at this company. And I knew that where I was not going to go anywhere. So they called me about 7:15 in the morning. I got up at 8, and they said, when can you be here? And I said, well, how about 8:30? And I quit my job and went right there and started there as literally as a PA. The pay was $2 an hour. If you worked 100 hours, you got $200.
Wow.
And that's how I got started in the business.
So outside of that, I mean, that leads into my next question, where that could have been the answer. As you look back on your career, is there one or two moments where you think you really got your big break, or maybe a person or event that kind of changed everything for you along the way?
Yeah, there were a couple. I mean, obviously that was one, because you never knew. I mean, I was at that company 6 months, and within 6 months, I was employee number 5 when I started. They were really small. Within 6 months, we had 75 employees, and I was management. And
Wow.
I had no clue what I was doing. I mean, I would get calls from grips on shows, and they would ask for Ford axles and bull pricks and trombones, and I'm writing it all down. I had no idea. I'm thinking, what does a guy need a trombone for on a show? You know, it's not a musician, so I had to go find out. I had to learn. And it was an interesting way to learn. I mean, the guy I worked for was a character. He did a lot of shows with Sheldon Leonard, and there were times that I worked on sets. I would fill in for the drivers sometimes because they were just exhausted or needed a day off or had to go to court or whatever. So I worked on shows like the FBI, the original FBI, the original Mod Squad, Chips, Daniel Boone was the first set I was ever on.
Wow.
And at that time, the sound mixer got ill, so the boom guy started mixing. They had another guy boom, and they had me on the inverter, which is you plug the sound plugged into the inverter. It was 12-volt batteries, and it converted to 220. The camera plugged in, and they would say roll sound, and I'd roll sound, and I had a little dial that I had a frequency meter. I had to get to 60 cycles, and then I'd roll the camera, and I had to dial that in, and when I had them both dialed in, I yelled speed. And that was the original version of how that all came about. The next big break for me came, I think it was in the mid-'80s, late '80s, when I was working for a guy, I won't mention his name, and he was producing shows for Universal, and I was kind of like his guy. And Universal made a deal with USA Network to do so many movies of the week a year. I think it was something like 25 a year, back when movies of the week were popular. And they called me up, Jim Waters, and it was Tom Thayer, I believe, who was head of that division. It was MTE at Universal. Called me up and said, we don't want to do business with that guy anymore. He's not so bad, but his secretary is a bitch, really. They said, we just don't want to deal with her. She's rude, she's nasty. And it's hard because he also lived with the woman. So they said, would you go into business? And we'd like to do business with you. And I said, well, I'm not really prepared. And they said, look, here's a check for $50,000. Here's a lawyer that can get you incorporated up and running. And can you open offices next week? So
wow.
you kind of go, okay. And so that's what I did. And that first movie was a thing called I'm Dangerous Tonight with Tobe Hooper directing for USA. And that's how I got started. That gave me my own company, which then led to a lot of stuff when Universal was opening Universal Studios in Orlando. They wanted to have something shooting there. And from my understanding, that's when Wasserman was in New York, and he met with Kay Koplovitz, who was head of USA, and they came up with, let's do Swamp Thing. It's perfect for Orlando. And so Universal sat me down and said, go shoot something called Swamp Thing. So we did 72 episodes of that, I think, over 2-3 years.
And when I look at your credits, you definitely have roots here in Florida. You know, between Kermit's Swamp Years was filmed in Florida. Sheena did two seasons of that television series, and all the post-production. The reboot of Charlie's Angels filmed their only season in Florida. The Elvis miniseries that you were involved in finished post-production and sound here in Florida. And then you mentioned Swamp Thing, filmed for 3 seasons. So I was fortunate enough to work with you on a couple of those, but talk about your time working in Florida and what stands out for you.
I loved working in Florida. When I first came down here, I was living in Palm Springs in California. And I came down here and I did Swamp Thing, and then I just kept working. Universal got me another movie of the week, and then I started working with Sony, and it just kind of went on. And then there was a Fortune Hunter series, which went for a year until the actor went and got himself killed. So I brought the wife down for a visit, and I didn't want to put her in Orlando. We were in Orlando for a while, but I took her to Longboat Key, and I put her on the beach for a month in a condo. And she called me up one morning, and she said, I'm on the balcony of the condo looking at a deserted beach. Why do we live in the desert? I went, and no state income tax. We now live in Sarasota. And I love Florida. I love the crews here were great. The people were great. It was a great atmosphere. And even though I was doing a show that I was based at Universal with Fortune Hunter, we were shooting at Disney. Disney didn't care. They were great. They let me shoot in the lagoon. They let me shoot in the aquarium they have, in the water park, and all over. We go in the rides at night after they close, and we'd shoot as if we're in different countries. It was an amazing experience. It's a little bit tougher to do it now because of security clearances and that. A lot of that was before 9/11, but it really was a very wonderful experience all around. And we had as you know, the post-production was right there. And you guys used to feed the edits into my office, so I didn't even have to go up to the building. I could sit there and question, the final cuts on the show or the various cuts of the shows without leaving my office. So it was a great setup. I loved it.
So in addition to your Florida projects, there are also a lot of really well-known titles in your credit list. I mean, just a couple of them are, you mentioned a few, and then The Net, the Brooke Ellison story, which was a great television movie, House of Cards, to name just a few. Do you have a favorite project through the years that you've worked on?
A lot of people ask me that, and it's funny because every project you go to work on, as you probably know, John, a lot of people know, everybody really believes this is the best and the greatest. And all the directors and the writers and the producers, everybody believes this is going to win their Emmy or their Academy Award, or it's going to be the best art direction or the best whatever. And it's kind of nice, but most of the time you have no idea when you're shooting this how it's going to turn out. Because I've worked on shows where you go, oh, this is embarrassing. This is terrible. And then by the time they cut it together, it's like, wow, that's pretty good. Or really good. And then there's shows that you work on, and the acting is so good, you got the crew in tears, and you've got everybody just thrilled and wonderful, and whatever happens in post and it gets cut together, and whether it's the director's version and the studio will get a hold of it sometimes and say, no, we're going to totally recut this, because they do have final cut for television, and you kind of go, what happened? And I've seen that happen multiple times, where either young producers didn't want to do it. They thought they knew better and they ruined a great show, or vice versa. Some editor came in and saved what was mediocre and made it great. So it's kind of a wonderful thing. But I think the perfect example of that was many, many years ago. This was in, I guess, the late 60s, early 70s. I can't remember. But I was called to work nights in a church parking lot off of the Hollywood freeway, and I was running an ARC at that time, which people don't use anymore, have no idea what they are. It's a big light. Mm-hmm. And we shot for 6 nights with these 2 weird animals walking across the sand and the dirt, 2 weird things. And then I went out and I worked at what turned out to be ILM, but they were in a hangar at Van Nuys Airport. And I worked there for 3 weeks doing what was visual effects, but at that time it was move the object a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, shoot a frame. Move it another 1/8 of an inch, shoot a frame. Now move it a 1/4 of an inch, shoot another frame. And that turned out to be ILM, and the movie was Star Wars. Who knew?
Wow.
You don't know. You work on these things, and at that time I didn't get scripts. I was just hired to run a light and push buttons and move a dolly. So, that was kind of fun.
Well, you've been working in the industry for a while, and when people come to you to work on a project, what are you looking for before you sign on? Or maybe more importantly, what do you look for that a project doesn't have to make sure you turn it down?
Well, there's a couple things. I've turned down a couple projects this year, mainly because I didn't want to commit to a year or 2 years away from home. When I was doing House of Cards, I was home somewhere between 8 and 10 weeks a year.
Wow.
6 years of that. I did the last 5 seasons, but it stretched over 6 years. I'm just getting too old, because I came off of Mob Doctor in Chicago, where I was gone for almost a year. And before that, there was 5 or 6 pilots I did in a row in Atlanta. And I went from one to the other and to House of Cards. And I didn't know what House of Cards was, but they showed me a preview before it came out, and I went, it's pretty good. Yeah, I'll go do that. It was interesting, but it was long, and it was hard, and the hours are long. And the last 3 seasons, I was producing and production managing, so it became a 7-day-a-week epic, which was okay. I'm not complaining. It takes a drag, and as you get up in years, getting up in the mornings at 4:30 or 5 are not quite as easy as it used to be when I was in my 20s and 30s.
I bet.
So I look at duration. I look at who's involved. Who are the players? Who am I going to have to deal with? Because some people have a reputation of being difficult, to say the least. And as a producer and even a production manager, you're stuck in the middle. You've got the studio on one hand going, not another dime, tell those guys no. And you got the producer and directors, the execs and the directors going, I got to have it. And whatever happens, if it turns out not as well as they expected, it's all your fault. And if it turns out really well, it was in spite of everything you did. And that's just the reality of that position. You're the one that's responsible for the money. You're the one that's responsible for the schedule. But ultimately, you don't have the creative control like you want to. You try to work with the execs and the director, and you try to have them be cooperative as far as helping you make the budget and make the time, make it all work. But it doesn't always work out that way.
So whether it's technology or content, the industry changes seemingly week to week. So over your career, it's probably changed quite a bit. Talk about the most impactful changes you've seen in the years that you've been in the industry.
Wow. Going back to when I started with Fuad Saeed Productions and Cinemobile, part of my training once I was moving up is one of the big cameras at that time was the Mitchell, was the NC Rackover Mitchell. And I was there when the BNC, which is the blimp camera, came out. And they sent me to Mitchell's factory in Burbank or Glendale, as I remember. And I spent 2 weeks taking a solid block of, I guess it was aluminum, and machining it down to a finished product and learning all about the mechanisms and all that. Then they sent me to Westinghouse to learn about generators. Then I went to Ford Motor in Detroit to learn about engines. Then I went to Ryder Sound, which used to be the biggest sound company in Hollywood, to learn about sound and sound transfers, and that's when you had separate sound tracks and all that stuff. So the industry has changed. I mean, I remember when the first crystal motor came out for the Aeroflex. That was a big deal. Before that, you'd kind of dial in to what you thought was 24 frames and hope for the best. So the industry has changed a lot. I mean, going through to where the Nagra came out, which was a huge thing, because before that it was these huge RCA machines.
Right.
The Nagras, wow, it truly is portable, has its own battery and everything, to HMIs when they came out. And they were a great thing, but hard to do because when they first came out, they had flicker problems, and they had a timer on them, and you would get charged so much a day for the light and so much an hour that it was on. So unlike today where you turn on the lights and they just leave them on, it was always turn it off, save that money, save that time. But yeah, technology's changed. I mean, lighting has changed. Now that you have LEDs, that's a whole nother world. Right. Where you don't have to gel it for day or night or to compensate for whatever it is. You just dial in the color, so and you can walk around it. They can be battery powered. So working in picture cars or if you're doing driving shots, you don't need the trailer. You can just put the light in the car and go for it. I mean, you do need the trailer for safety depending on what you're doing, but it makes life so much simpler. Digital cameras came out, and that was a whole other revolution that a lot of DPs fought because they didn't understand it. I mean, they were the old timers, and they were going to stick with film. That's what they knew. But now you have digital cameras. But I laugh when you say, here's the camera, and it's a small 6x6 body. But by the time you put the lenses on and the battery pack and the holders for the filter and the they're just the same size as the old Panaflex almost. Right. So technology is great. I mean, you get to play it back right away. You get to see what you have. You get to look at the monitors. I've always said if I was directing, I'd have one little personal monitor for me because you're now directing by committee. You've got makeup and hair and set dressing and wardrobe and other actors or whoever, all these people looking and giving an opinion. Right. That's why I quit doing commercials. I didn't have the patience to sit there to have the agency art director and the production company's art director and the client's art director all discussing the shade of gray. I spent one time 3 days painting gray to figure out what color shade they like on backdrops. It's changed the industry. I mean, all that technology has really changed the industry. And I would have to say it's a good way in many senses, but sometimes you miss the old where you paid an operator on the camera to say it was good. Right. Now you got everybody's opinion. Yeah, things are definitely done by committee. Yeah. I mean, back then, as the director would direct the talent, the DP would do the lighting, and the camera guy would do the composition, And you'd look at them, and the director would say, good for me, and the operator would say, good for me, and you'd move on. It wasn't, what does everybody else think?
So, Boris, I'm sure you get the question a lot, how do I get in the industry? So when someone asks you that these days, what do you tell them?
Depends on what they want to do. I personally quit hiring people out of film school because everybody came out of film school wanted to be a producer or director. And I said, that's great, but to be a good producer or a good director, you need to understand how everything works as a group. You know, I like the way I came up. I have done everything except makeup and hair, and I've done touch-up on hand makeup for hand inserts and stuff. So I was a dolly grip. I was a gaffer. I've operated camera. I shot stuff. I've done sound. I filled in as a mixer. I filled in as a boom man. I've never done it for the whole show because I've always been the go-to guy. Hey, this guy's sick. Can you do this for 2-3 days till he gets better? Or his wife's having a baby. Can you fill in here? Done it all. And it's a great way to learn because when a DP comes to me and says, I need this to make this shot, I understand what he's talking about. And I also understand when he's feeding me a line of bull.
Right.
You know, so you've got both things going for you there, that it really helps, but you understand what it takes to do it. I think the hardest working people on a set are the PAs. Those guys first in, last out, and get the garbage jobs, you know, the dirt jobs. Go get this, go get that. But they learn. You know, they learn what it takes. They work with all the departments, and that's how you learn. It's a lot. When I started in the business, the studios used to each have their own training thing. I mean, if you wanted to work at a grip, you went into the sewing room and you started sewing nets and covering reflectors with silver or gold leaf, fixing things. And when you got good at fixing things, then they'd let you go to a rigging crew on a stage before you could ever go on a location. And it was the same thing with electric. You would sit in the electric room and you would fix cables and wire things and repair stuff before they ever let you go out. Camera, you would spend a year or two in the loading room at night. I used to go to Fox, 4 o'clock in the morning, pick up X amount of loaded magazines, which was the film for the day, and then you go out to location, you'd shoot all day, and the director better get it with what he's got because there's no more film coming, unlike today where they just keep letting it roll with digital.
Right.
And then you take it back at night, and then the guys would unload the magazines and reload them, which you would pick up the next morning. Those guys, and that's how you started in camera. You started in the loading room for a year or 2 years, and then maybe they'd move you into the, cleaning, because every night those cameras got cleaned, lenses got cleaned, cameras got cleaned, and before you'd ever go out as a loader on a location, and then you'd move up to second. So it was a different time. Now I know guys that went out and bought a Niagara and a fishbowl and said, hey, I'm a mixer.
Right.
Oh, okay. So, you got an iPhone, you can be a DP. It's very different now, and the opportunities are there. But if you want to learn, my thing is try and get as much experience in any area that you want. Go on and work as a grip, work as an electrician, work craft service. You want to see how hard that is? That's hard. But learn. Look to the guys around you to teach you how to do it. And then if you want to produce, it makes you a better producer because you understand how long it's going to take. I mean, so many times a director, I can shoot that an hour. And I go, maybe you can shoot it an hour, but it's 30-minute travel. It's going to take us 45 minutes to unload and light the scene, and then I got to wrap and move. So it's a 4-hour shot. So let's talk about it if you've got a 12-hour day. And until you've done it, you really don't know how all that fits together and how it works. So my advice is take any job you can get and take the experience because it's only going to help you. I know it sounds like work, and a lot of people don't want to work anymore these days. They figure if they show up, you can pay me. I'm here. Uh-huh. But it's a hard job. I mean, people say to me, oh, it's glory. And I go, no, it's a job, and it's fulfilling. When you get it right, it's very fulfilling. But it's not easy. It's not, I'm going to sit in the chair all day. You see the pictures of everybody sitting in director's chairs with their lattes. No, that's not the way it is. In reality.
Well, you've mentioned a lot of different roles within a crew. What do you think is the most underrated position in a crew?
Well, like I said, I think the PAs,
Yeah.
believe it or not, PAs and craft service, they never stop working. You know, when the camera's rolling, the PAs are responsible for lockup. So they got to stop the crowd, the people from walking through the background. They got to keep going. When you cut, then they got to release the crowds and they on locations. And then they're always, and get me this, and go to the trailer and tell her we're ready. Find out when the actress is going to be ready. It's a constant thing. And those guys work 14 to 16-hour days. You got to be young to do that. But it's not a thankful job. You just take it for granted. But that's how they learn, and you get great experience. Because when you're rolling, grips, electrical, camera, everybody except the first AC and the operator are standing there watching. So it's 15 minutes of going crazy for the next setup or half hour, whatever it is, and then you stand around and they could shoot. I've been on sets where you do take 60. So you're in 2 hours, 3 hours, you're sitting doing nothing.
Right. Boris, you shared a ton of great stories, but do you have any disaster stories you want to share? I mean, you don't need to name names or people or projects or anything, but do you just have any funny stories from your career?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times they go, oh, whoa, we got this great guest star. Look at his name or look at her name. And you bring them up and you put them through wardrobe and you have somebody go with them and rehearse their lines so they're all good. They get on the set, 1 word, 2 words at a time. They just can't remember anything. They're brain dead. Cue cards, then they just stare at the cue cards. So what we do is we have somebody feeding them lines off camera. 1 line at a time, 1 word at a time sometimes. And it's kind of disheartening. You know, you've looked up to this person for several years as a great actor, and here they are going, what's my line? What's my line? What's my line? No, every day is a surprise. Every day is something new and something unexpected. There's times when you try and budget allowance and you say, okay, I need to run the set at 7:30 in the morning. You talk to makeup, you talk to hair, you talk to wardrobe. What should we allow for makeup and hair? They said 2 hours tops. So we go, okay, that's 5 a.m. We're going to pick her up at 4:30. We go there at 4:30. She doesn't come down till 5:30. She takes 3 hours in the chair, complains about her wardrobe because she gained 2 pounds at dinner last night and it doesn't fit right. And your day is shot. And the director's looking at you and you go, I still only got 12 hours budgeted. Those are the kind of challenges that you have to face. And it's funny when you look back on it, but it wasn't funny when it happened.
Right. So without naming names, unless you want to, of course, what's next for you?
I was actually thought I was going to retire after House of Cards. And I came home October of last year, and I said, well, I'll do some consulting. And, of course, one of the shows that came up in March was a show about D.C., and, they called looking for our sets, which are all gone. And they said, will you consult since you know that area, Baltimore, D.C.? And I said, sure. And that kind of went on and on and on for a while. And then just last week they called and said, okay, we're going to shoot it. Will you shoot it? And I went, said, okay, well, let's start with the pilot and see how that goes. So I'm now going back to work in Baltimore for a Showtime series. I don't think I can say much more about it at this point, but it's another political thriller kind of thing.
Well, we'll probably be able to figure out in a couple of months what it is. So you've given us enough information, enough backstory on that. Yeah.
No, you never know in this business. I mean, I retired, and the wife said, you sure you want to retire? Why don't you consult? Oh, okay. So I opened the consulting business, and it's been busy, and I've had to turn down, like I said earlier, several jobs that just they wanted long-term commitments or they wanted me right away. This other show, I said, look, guys, I'm going on a cruise for 3 weeks. I'm gone in almost the whole month of October. They said, okay, not a problem. You've got people. Have your people cover for you. So, okay. I talked to the wife, and she said, you love it. Go ahead and do it. Maybe this will be the last one. So you never know.
Boris, as you look back on your career, do you look back in awe of what you've accomplished?
It's been a great life. That's all I can say. I'm 72 years old. I got in the business when I was either 19 or 20. I can't really remember that far back. And there's so much, then there's so many changes and so much happened that you learn to roll with it. Back in those days, you were getting, like I said, I started $2 an hour. When I moved up to management, I was getting $750 a week. It's like, holy crap, I'm rich, but, and then you go out to freelance. I mean, after I left what turned out to be Cinemobile, he sold the company to Cinemobile, I went to work for a guy called Roy Isaiah. And it was me and Roy and his mother. And he had been building grip equipment to fit on the small trucks. And, I was building apple boxes and came up with one of the early doorway dollies. And I was learning to machine stuff and build stuff and do things. And then I left him after a year because I didn't want to just build grip equipment. And I ended up being in charge, a rental manager at F&B Seco, which was one of the larger rental houses in New York and Los Angeles. And I did that for a couple of years. And then I just decided it was time to freelance. And all these guys were having so much fun, and I was stuck in an office. So I went out and freelanced. And that's where I got myself in trouble, doing stuff. And, I spent a year and a half doing nothing but rock video, and I did Madonna, and I did Sting, and I did, I can't even remember. Every once in a while I hear a record. I did that video. I did that. I did Robbie Robertson for the opening of MTV. He did a 2-part video we shot in New Mexico in 1987, I think that was, 6 or 7. Dealing with the Indians. I think because Robbie's part Indian. And, he'd go in the hut to make negotiations, and we'd lose him for a couple hours. Started to worry about it. But that was up in Four Corners. We shot that. We shot the video at the Acoma Indian Reservation. You do things and you just don't even think about it. I mean, I shot Pat Benatar in the middle of the desert wearing leather pants. God bless her. So, it's just work. People get very fascinated by it, but it's work, and a lot of it is fun. I mean, at one time, I had 2 roommates. We had a great house in the Hollywood Hills. Tim Clausen, who went on to be, he's an executive, I think he was with Weinstein for many years. He was his production guy. He's head production guy. He's back in L.A. now. And then, God bless him, John Hopgood, who was a great first AD, and he passed away recently. But, we had a house full of people, and, 3 guys living in a house in the Hollywood Hills with a great view. We had some great parties, and people at those parties that you go, wow, a lot of great DPs and young actors, and at the time it's just, okay. So it's been a good life, and I can't complain. And if anybody wants to try it, go for it, but don't expect it to be easy, and don't expect it to be all gravy, because there will be lean times. When you're freelancing, you're only as good as the last job, because it's one phone call is what you need. I never had an agent, so I was lucky, but I didn't early when I was freelancing. It wasn't always easy. You don't often get the calls from Universal and say, we want to do business. We want to put you in business. I mean, that was a major thing for me. And you have 2 hours to make your decision, because we're going to move on to somebody else because we need it now.
Well, Boris, I really appreciate you squeezing us in to be on the podcast today, and thanks for sharing all your great stories. And personally, I really appreciate the guidance you've offered me over the last 20 years. I can honestly say that some of the lessons you taught me while working on Sheena and Elvis were some of the most important lessons that I've learned in my career.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm a big believer in pay it forward. You want my job? Okay, go for it. I'm not going to stop you, And if you can pay it forward, because you never know. In my opinion, the next guy, I did a movie 1984 in Palm Springs, and my location manager was a guy named Hal Polaire Jr., who's now went on to be an executive. You don't know who these people are going to be. You never know. Denise DeNovi was the writer's assistant, or it was New World or New Line. She was the rep for New Line. Denise DeNovi went on to be a huge producer, directing now. So you never know the people you're going to work with, where they're going to be next week or next year. And that's what's wonderful about this business. Who knew that you're going to go out and George Lucas and Star Wars? What do I know? George who? And he didn't know me either. So it was 2 ways. But, You just never know. It really is a small business, and it really is a challenge sometimes, where you're always walking the line between production and what the studio wants. It depends on your department, but I always believe pay it forward. If somebody's going to take my job, more power to them, and they did a better job than I did. So what did I do wrong? Never ride on your laurels. Just do the best you can. And I'm a believer in treating people like people. Don't demean them. Don't yell. Educate, because it'll only be better. Everybody's going to make mistakes, and I tell all my people that. I said, you make a mistake, just tell me, and I'll handle it. I'll take responsibility. But if you make a mistake and you don't tell me, I'll let you bury yourself. I said, I can't be blindsided. And as soon as they learn not to fear telling me the truth, it becomes easier. Everything becomes easier because you can get ahead of the situation, whatever it is.
That is great advice, Boris, and I appreciate you sharing it. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at teespring.com/stores/Film Florida. And of course, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.